Now, at this point, Simba also gets introduced to Scar, and that has two meanings. One is that Scar is the tyrannical element of the state, and so as a child, when you're being socialized, you encounter the tyranny of the state, and one of the best, there's no way around it. One of the best examples of that is that children are always running around having fun, and they're really bubbly and impulsive and joyous and playful. And that causes a lot of trouble because positive emotion is very disruptive. They'll run around and break things, they'll hurt themselves, and they'll get into trouble. And so you're always saying, calm down, sit down, behave, don't do that. And it's not because they're crying or angry, it's because they're so damn happy and impulsive that no one can stand them. And so that's a tyranny. It's like the state puts pressure on you to regulate your emotions, positive, negative, and positive. And it crushes you. It crushes the life out of you, a lot of it. And so you end up, your age, and you're all mopey because especially because you've been forced to sit down in school for like 17 years. You're all mopey, and it's no wonder, you've had the spirit taken out of you by the process of discipline. But without that, you'd be completely useless. So it's another one of those paradoxical, gifts and catastrophes that you encounter as you move through life. So anyways, Simba, look at how happy he is, he doesn't know a damn thing. He's so naive, you can tell by, oh, look, it's my Uncle Scar. It's like, and this is not a guy you smile at, clearly, but he's all positive emotion and joy and enthusiasm, and that's not good because that means this character can take serious advantage of it, and that's exactly what he does. And so Scar pretends to be on his side, which is what a good pedophile always does, by the way. And so, you take advantage of the child's trusting nature and openness in order to exploit them. And that's what horrible people do that all the time, including the parents of children and other children themselves. So, there's this false, look at the animators are so damn brilliant, eh? Look at that expression. Really, you just look at that and you think, well, that's just a facial expression. But of course it's not. Some damn animators worked really hard to get that. They're really observant, and they distill the facial, look how big the face is, right? It covers the whole head. And they've got the eyebrow lifts proper, and they've got this horrible sanctimonious smile and the tilt of the head, and and he's sort of crushing him while he's hugging him at the same time, and really. And it took a lot of thought for every single one of these frames to be put together, right? There's a tremendous amount of cognitive effort that went into that. So none of this is accidental. Yeah, well, that pretty much says everything. It's like, I hate that kid, and I can hardly wait till he's gone. And didn't I pull one over on him? It's a real testament to an adult's genius when he can fool a kid. So then Simba encounters the anima. That's the anima, the Jungian anima. And the anima is the feminine counterpart in the soul. And she, well, yeah, you can tell what she does to him, right? Because she's got this supercilious and what would you say, judgmental and teasy look on her face. And she's really trying to put him down, and it's working like mad. He's not very happy about that at all. And she's the thing, this is what the anima does, the soul. She's the thing that teaches the exploratory hero that it's not everything it could be, right? And that's part of, this can be read multiple ways, but it's part of the eternal tendency of women to make men self-conscious by their sexual selectivity. That's part of it, because that makes men self-conscious like nothing else. And it's also perhaps been one of the phenomena that's produced the evolutionary arms race in the sexes among human beings that's caused our rapid cortical expansion and our quick movement away from chimpanzees, who aren't selective maters, by the way. So look at him, Jesus, you just want to slap him, right? He's the son of a king, so he's very, very privileged, and he confuses his privilege with competence, which of course all of you do, because you're all sons of the king, which is why you can sit here in the university, and you confuse your privilege with competence as well, because has nothing to do with any of you that the lights are on and this place is so peaceful, right? But you take that for granted, and it can make you false and arrogant, like Jesus. That's just so sad. You look at that kid, you think, he's in for real trouble, man. He thinks he knows everything. And of course, then he has a wrestling match with, what's her name? Was it? Nala, yeah, has a wrestling match with Nala, and she just pins him every time, right? Got you again, pinned you again. And that's basically right. One of the things that happens with men when they meet a woman who they really desire and admire is they project an ideal onto her immediately. That's an anima projection. And then that anima projection judges them, and they act all inferior and stupid. And it's partly because they are. That's why. And so then they go down in defeat constantly to this thing that they're projecting, which at least has some concordance with the actual woman, but not that much. So, okay, they keep wrestling, and then they're on the fringe of the kingdom. This wrestling match between this pairs of opposites takes them to the edge of the kingdom, and they end up in the elephant's graveyard, right? And there's bones everywhere. And so now they're out into the kingdom of death. And what that means is that these two kids, as they've grown up, encounter death, right? They go outside the light, and it's very, very shocking for them. They're very curious about it, obviously. They go to explore the skeletons and all of that, even though they were told not to. But their curiosity, they can't stay away from death. They're too curious about it. And so they develop knowledge of death. And then, of course, out there in the deadlands is where the hyenas are. And that's exactly right, because hyenas are scavengers, right? And they can break bones with their teeth. They're really, really quite the animal. And, you kind of have a shudder of repugnance when you see those things. And I think it's partly, we shared an evolutionary landscape with the ancestors of hyenas for a very, very long time. And like vultures too, You couldn't imagine something that would be more well-designed to look like it was a horrible thing than a vulture, right? And there's this weird concordance, and crows and ravens are like that too, carrion eaters, Eagles are kind of an exception, but they look just as creepy as they are, which is really quite interesting. And of course, hyenas fall into that category, and they laugh too, which is, really? You also have to laugh, really, with all these other things you have going for you? And anyways, the hyenas are enemies of lions, and they can take lions down. They're tough things, and they not one hyena, obviously, but a bunch of hyenas can give a lion a pretty damn rough time. And these little lions are really no match for the hyenas, and so they get threatened very, very rapidly. They're in real trouble. Now, the king's eye, who's supposed to be keeping an eye on this and was supposed to be watching Simba, is trying to intervene, but look at him. He's like a delicious little bird, and so that's not working out very well. Anyways, and then you see this immediate juxtaposition of the domain of death and the hyenas with hell. Right? And everyone looks at that and they think, well, they know exactly what that means. It's no surprise to anyone that happens. And now the hyenas go after the little lion, obviously, but they manage to escape. It's a very malevolent scene. And Mufasa shows up at the last minute to rescue them. So, and that there's also a mythological trope there, which is that if you go outside your domain of competence and you encounter something you don't understand, the first thing that you're going to do is look to the knowledge structures that you already possess to explain it, right? And that's you could say from a symbolic perspective that's the manifestation of the Father, because of course that's what you're going to do. And what's really interesting too is because I've had a lot of clients who've had PTSD, and without exception, every single one of them was induced by one form of malevolence or another. They have to develop a very sophisticated philosophy of good and evil to get out of it, because they have a worldview in which those things don't really exist. There's no such thing as pure malevolence. Well, that's fine unless you encounter it. And then as soon as you encounter it, you won't know what to do. And then you won't be able to get on with your life. You'll do nothing but think about that and think about it and think about it and think about it. It'll disrupt your sleep. It'll put you into a permanent state of preparation for action. Because the part of your brain that's detected that, which in my estimation, by the way, is the same part, at least in part, that detects snakes. It's the same damn circuit. Once it's seen something like that, it is not going to let you go till you figure it out. And that's basically what post-traumatic stress disorder is. And to some degree, each of you will have experienced that, maybe not all of you in here, but many of you. And you can tell that. So if you go back and you think about your past, and you have any memory that's more than about 18 months old, and when you think about it, it produces a fair bit of negative emotion, then that's like a place where there's a mini post-traumatic stress problem. Now, of course, they're pretty cowed about what has happened, because they sort of stumbled stupidly out into the unknown. They stumbled foolishly out into the unknown. And so there's real utility in staying within the bounded domain. But the problem is that there may be information that's outside of that domain that you absolutely need to know. And so part of the problem with being alive is that you have to continually determine how much you're going to maintain your stability and how much you're going to explore. And you have to explore because the stable part of you gets outdated. But if you explore too much or too unwisely, then you can encounter things that flip you upside down. Anyways, Mufasa has a chat with Simba and, tells him that he did what he wasn't supposed to do. Although, even in that situation, Mufasa's discipline is paradoxical, because there's part of him, because he's reasonably wise, that knows that breaking the rules like that is actually necessary. Even though you still have to say, play by the damn rules. You have to leave that door open so that the rules can be broken an appropriate amount. So he forgives him, and peace is made between them, and then they involve themselves in sort of gazing at the night sky. And so the two of them do that together. And the night sky is an interesting place, because that's where the absolute unknown resides. And one of the things Jung wrote a lot about was astrology, strangely enough, / astronomy. And one of Jung's contentions, this is a very interesting one, was that because the night sky was completely unknown, people could project their fantasies into it. And that's what they did with astrology. So astrology is this cumulative fantasy that's going on in the, roughly speaking, in the deep unconscious, projected onto the sky. And so if you analyze old astrological writings, what you're really doing is analyzing old fantasies, and because of that, you could develop some insight into the structure of the mind. And so he did the same thing with alchemy in his later writings, which are very, very difficult to understand, but extremely worthwhile. Okay, so anyways, back to the hellish domain. Now, I told you that domain that's outside of knowledge, you could think about that as the underworld, or you can think about it as nature, the negative element of nature in particular. And so I mentioned that one element of that is hellish, and that's exactly what the movie explains next. It does exactly that. We go back out to this domain that Scar, the adversary, or the negative king, that's another way of looking at him. This is the domain over which he rules. And so you can see him there surrounded in fire. Same idea as the hyenas surrounded by fire earlier, although this is green fire and smoke, which I think is even worse. And this is where the movie starts to draw on essentially Nazi symbolism, at least the symbolism of totalitarian states. And you think about a totalitarian state, you think about the Nazis and their goose stepping. And what's happening is that every single person in the military becomes an identical unit, right? They're all uniform, and they're all, in some sense, imitating the dictator in an absolutely perfect way. And so the dictator wants to impose strict uniformity on the entire population. Anyways, so what happens out here in this terrible domain where Scar rules is that things turn into a totalitarian state. And he's presented here as a Nazi-like leader. You see, he's got this kind of vicious grin on his face, which is malicious and pleased all at the same time. There's no fear in that. It's quite the opposite. And there's another image of, using what's essentially imagery of hell. Everyone understands that when they see it, even without, I would say, the overt references to Nazism. Okay, so now Scar has a plan. He's going to kill the king, and he's going to do that by putting what the king loves in danger. And so Scar, feigning sympathy, has enticed Simba down into this ravine, and Scar's minions are going to cause a wildebeest stampede, right? So a mindless stampede to put Simba in danger. And so that's what happens here. The wildebeest start to march into the ravine, and everyone is making a Scar tells Mufasa that Simba is down in that ravine and entices him down there, and so they're all off running to see if they can save Simba. And then you see Mufasa running in front of the wildebeest herd, trying to find his son and trying to stay ahead of them, the mad mob that's put his son in danger. And so he tries to escape, climbing up the butte, which is almost a sheer cliff. And when he gets to the top, his brother is waiting for him there, and he asks him to pull him up. And Scar basically, before he kills him indicates that he's betraying him and puts his claws into Mufasa's paws and throws him off the cliff. And so that's that, and it's a sad part of the story. It's a hard part that's very hard on kids because the father has died, and it's a rare kid who won't cry about that scene in particular where you see Simba very upset and his father dying. Now, this is a hard part of the story to interpret, and I don't know if it's because of my lack of ability to interpret or because the story takes a weird twist here, but there is this confusion in the story about whether Simba's an innocent victim who's set up for the murder of his father or whether he actually bears some guilt for it, and he's broken some rules and so on, so he's not exactly placed in the position of innocence, but of course he's also been set up by Scar. In any case, Scar tells him that it's his fault, pure and pure, and that because of that he's going to have to leave. He's going to have to be banished beyond the kingdom. Now, you see this motif quite frequently in hero stories where the hero has to be raised outside of the kingdom. That happens with King Arthur, for example. And it happens with Harry Potter, right? Because Harry Potter is raised by muggles instead of being inside the magic kingdom. So it's a very common theme. And partly what it means is that it means two things. One is that you do grow up alienated from your culture to some degree. There's no way around that because the culture doesn't match you perfectly. And it doesn't work for you perfectly. And it's old and it's kind of corrupt. And it alienates you as it's shaping you. And so you're going to develop some separation from it. And you see that in intergenerational rhetoric, where the new generation has the proclivity to blame the previous generation for everything that's wrong with the current system. And fair enough, because you do inherit everything that's wrong. Of course, you also inherit everything that's going well, which is a good thing to also notice. But the idea is that you can't help but be alienated from, let's call it the patriarchy for lack of a better word, because it's got a tyrannical element and because it's not matched well to you. So, but then there's also this other issue, which is, well, maybe you're not being successful by the terms that are, by the values that are instantiated in the current system. And you might say, well, that's because the system is set up in an unfair manner, and fair enough. But it's also possibly because you're just not very good at acting out those values. Right? So part of the reason you get alienated from your culture is because the culture is corrupt. But another part of the reason is you're just not doing as well as you could be. You're not playing by even your own rules properly. And so you get alienated and you're unsuccessful because of your own inadequacies. And so the movie plays both of those. It's obviously Simba is set up, but there is an intimation that he's not entirely blameless as well. Anyways, he's very broken up about this, and no wonder. It's also partly a story of the emergence of adolescence, because when you're a child and you're ensconced right inside the familial framework, then you sort of exist within that system of rules like you would under the Piagetian scheme. But when you become an adolescent, then there's much more of a proclivity to break free and to start breaking rules. And so that's also akin in some sense to the death of the father. And that's a necessary developmental stage. Anyway, Scar comes down into the ravine. It's all foggy now because that goes along with the sort of murkiness of death, and tells Simba that it's his fault and that he's going to have to leave. He's going to have to leave the kingdom of his father, which makes sense now his father's dead. So how are you going to, once your father has died, how are you going to stay around in his kingdom, so to speak? So, and then Scar tries to get these hyenas to go track Simba down and kill him. So, and Zazu goes back to tell all the rest of the lions that Mufasa is dead and that Simba has disappeared. And then Scar takes over Pride Rock. And so what's happened now is the malevolent element of the king has obtained control over the state, right? And so this is the king, the wise king wasn't paying enough attention. That's one way of looking at it. And so the malevolent part of the state has now got control. This is a very, very old idea. I've traced it back at least several thousand years in its representation in stories. You can see it in Egyptian mythology, for example. So the idea is that as the social structure builds in complexity, it offers you the protection of a functioning complex system, but it also becomes increasingly likely to turn into a tyranny. And because it's more and more powerful, the fact of its potential for tyranny becomes more and more of a danger. And so then the question is, well, what are the factors that encourages it turning into a tyranny? And one factor would be the wise part of it is not paying enough attention to the malevolent part of it. And you could say that's true at the state level, and it's also true at the individual level, right? You have to watch your own proclivity to upset yourself and other people and take that into account and pay careful attention to it, because otherwise it can gain control, especially because you're going to avoid looking at it. And one of the characteristics of the wise king who gets overthrown by the tyrant is that he has an evil brother and he won't pay enough attention to him. He avoids, he doesn't look. And so the evil king gets the upper hand, and that's what's happened here. And so notice now he takes possession of Pride Rock, not in full daylight, right? But at night. So that ties his rule into the rule of unconscious processes and malevolence.